Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with Part 7, The Entered Apprentice Degree continued. From Symbolism of the Three Degrees by Oliver Day Street, Part 1, The Entered Apprentice Degree. Brotherly love is symbolized among us by two right hands joined or by two human figures, holding or supporting each other by the right hand. This is a very old symbol and represents the goddess Fides, who anciently was supposed to preside over the virtue of fidelity. This virtue of keeping faith with or performing a duty towards even an enemy was greatly esteemed among the ancients. But a reading of their literature will prove that the idea of love for one's fellow man in the abstract scarcely found a lodgment in their conceptions. It is obvious that the virtue of brotherly love is of a far higher type than that of fidelity. It constrains us to keep faith and perform a duty just as strongly as does the latter, but it furnishes a nobler motive and impels us to do more when occasion arises than to perform the mere requirements of good faith and duty. It well illustrates the development under modern sociological and religious teachings of the element of love or charity in all the relations of men. It can scarcely be denied that chief among these influences have been the lofty and unselfish teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Of this need only read C.L. Bracy's Gesta Christi, Love Thy Neighbor as Thyself, was a strange doctrine to most of the people of his day, but now it is thoroughly familiar to us, however imperfectly we practice it. David, Psalm 133, saying the virtues of brethren dwelling together in unity, and likened it to the precious ointment upon the head and beard of Aaron, and to the dews which fell upon Mount Hermon. The beauties of these similes are so charmingly set forth in the address before the Grand Lodge of Alabama in 1843 by Brother Eugene V. Levert that I take the following excerpt from it. Because this unity is good and pleasant, David compares it to the sacred oil or precious ointment with which Aaron the high priest was consecrated to office. This ointment was composed of olive oil with several aromatic substances, which made it a most fragrant and delightful perfume. The Israelites were positively forbidden to make any like it or to have, or use it for common purposes. This ointment of consecration was emblematical of the Holy Spirit's influences, which alone can enlighten and purify the heart of man. And by this comparison we are taught that God alone can afford that grace by which the corrupt heart of man may be disposed to peace and unity with his brethren. He compares it to this ointment also because of the pleasure which such a state of unity amongst brethren affords to society, that as the fragrant smell of this ointment which was poured upon the head of Aaron extended to and delighted with its fragrance all around him, so unity of brethren is a source of pleasure as well as advantage to every member of the community. He compares it also to the dew which fell on Mount Hermon. Hermon is a range of mountains on the northern border of the land of Canaan, or of the Israelites on the east side of Jordan, including within its range several eminencies, one of which is called Zion. This is not the same as Zion the holy city, but it is one of the eminencies of Hermon. It is said that the dew which forms upon this mountain is so abundant that a person exposed to it in the night would be so thoroughly wet as though he had been drenched with water. And yet it is so salubrious that a man might sleep in the open air all night and be without feeling the least inconvenienced, or suffering any injuries from the dew of Hermon to this abundant and healthful dew. David compares unity amongst brethren to teach us that it is fruitful in its benefits and pleasures, shedding an abundance of good upon all who come within its influence, communicating the most solid pleasures and advantages without injury to anyone. Unity among brethren is wealth to the indigent, instruction to the ignorant, a friend to the friendless, and a father to the orphan. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, there not on Hermon, but on a society of united brethren. For where such union exists, it is the product of the Spirit of holiness, which causes the purified heart to send forth the tribute of praise, ardent and savory, as the pot of burning incense. Relief of the distressed is but a manifestation, a putting into practice in one of its most important aspects of the tenet of brotherly love. One who loves his fellow man will hasten to his relief when in distress. The picture of the Good Samaritan, however so often seen in our monitors, can hardly be said to rise to the dignity of a true symbol. It is only an illustration. Truth is said to be the third tenet of Freemasonry. It is symbolized by the Bible. Freemasonry seeks not only to render us unafraid of truth, but to impress upon us the beauties and solemnities of truth in all its manifold manifestations. There are millions of people, indeed the great bulk of mankind, who are afraid of truth. They fear their preconceived notions and belief cannot withstand the light of truth. They forget that a knowledge of truth cannot possibly injure any person or any just cause. In no fields are people more afraid of the truth than in those of religion and politics. And while Freemasonry dabbles with neither, it does urge the individual Mason to be at all times ready and willing to receive, accept, and act upon the truth in matters religious and political, as indeed in all other matters. One need not be afraid of serious religious or political error among a people where all are earnestly seeking the truth and all are willing to be guided by it when found. There is no lesson more important and none, we believe, more commonly forgotten among men than that an earnest, burning desire for truth is sine qua non, without which the highest development of the human race is impossible. Nothing can retard human development more than a cowardly or ignorant unwillingness to know the truth, and to have it known. We can understand why the selfish man often does not want the truth known. But the pathetic thing is that most often it is his victim who struggles most frantically to assist in staying the stream of truth, which, if allowed to flow, would soon cover the quagmires of ignorance, superstition, and error with shining seas of knowledge. Masonry also admonishes us to consider the earth, the firmament, the universe, all nature, as a vast scroll unrolled before us, whereon we may behold and in some measure at least read and understand God's revelation of His truth to man. It seeks to direct our attention to the miracles by which we are surrounded every moment of our lives, such as light, air, earth, and water, and to the various manifestations of force, such as adhesion, cohesion, friction, heat, electricity, attraction, repulsion, and gravitation, to enlist our interest in them and to stimulate in us an effort and measure at least to understand them. It assures us that, like love, it is better to have tried and failed than never to have tried at all. From a baffled study of any one of the phenomena of truth, we return stronger and wiser and better men. Moreover, Masonry suggests to us that the unsuccessful effort to learn the truths of nature are not only not lost in this life, but will bear fruit in the life to come, just as the pupil who studies hard but fails is better prepared for the next lesson than if he had not studied at all. In one of the Scottish Rite degrees, the candidate is told, "Nature is a revolution and the light of truth shines everywhere in the world. The one of faith and the refusal of men to reason make the shadows. Man is blindfolded by himself. All men might be freed, but ignorance and superstition forge the fetters, and men enchain themselves and create their own bondage. If you prefer anything in the world to reason, truth, and justice, if logic alarms you, and the naked truth gives you blush, if to assail receives errors is to wound you, seek not to become an adept. You will not comprehend these secrets. To show the light to nocturnal birds is to conceal it from them, since it blinds them and is darker to them than the darkness. Truth is one of the most comprehensive words in any language. If we be true, we cannot be false to any duty. Hence, the entire moral and religious codes are embraced in this tenet of our order. Are we not told in the sacred writings that God Himself is truth? Light is a familiar and most appropriate symbol of knowledge, both mental and spiritual. as darkness is of ignorance. These are among our commonest figures of speech, and we employ them almost unconsciously. So much so that our appreciation of their beauty is greatly dulled. In our own peculiar way, this transaction from darkness to light is symbolically represented in our ceremonies. The shock of enlightenment, or battery of acclamation, says Brother W. Wynne Westcott, when the candidate is restored to light, is a direct imitation of the sudden crash of feigned thunder and lightning by which the neophyte of the Eleusinian mysteries was greeted. Light being perhaps the greatest natural phenomena in the universe, it is appropriate that it should be made to symbolize the most important thing in the development of human character, namely, knowledge, education, cultivation, enlightenment. There are said to be 3 lights in the lodge, one in the south, one in the west, and one in the east. There is said to be none in the north, and that hence it is called a place of darkness. Applied to our ordinary lodge rooms, this is meaningless, but applied to the world as the ancients knew it, and of which, as we have seen, the lodge is emblematic. It has a charming symbolism. It alludes to the fact that persons living in the northern hemisphere, where all the civilized people of antiquity dwelt, the sun each day appears in the east, ascends to the zenith in the south, where he seems to become stationary for a short space, and thence descends and disappears in the west. The east, south, and west seem, therefore, to be his stations. In the northern hemisphere, he never attains the north. The ancients supposed the south to be a region of intense heat and blinding light, and the extreme north to be a region of perpetual darkness. We have in this symbol, therefore, a reflection of these primeval concepts of mankind concerning the world. The jewels of the lodge, 6 in number, are said to be the square, the level, the plumb, the rough ashlar, the perfect ashlar, and the trestle board. In America, the first 3 are called the immovable jewels, and the latter 3, the movable jewels. In England, this is precisely reversed, the first 3 being the movable, and the latter the immovable. No one has yet been able to give any satisfying reason for calling either the one set or the other movable or immovable. So we shall not attempt an explanation here of what has never been explained. The real jewels of the lodge, however, are what the square, the level, the plumb, the rough ashlar, the perfect ashlar, and the trestle board typify. That is to say, 1. Morality symbolized by the square. 2. Equality symbolized by the level. 3. Uprightness symbolized by the plumb. 4. A man of untrained, uneducated mind, but of sterling character as typified by the stone, rough and uneven in outline, but of fine and approved texture. A stone capable of being fitted for the finest building. 5. The trained and educated man, who by cultivation and development of his natural qualities has become both an ornament and a blessing to society, as typified by the stone of perfect shape and design chiseled out of the rough stone as taken from the quarry. 6. Every source from which the truth may be learned, which deity has laid down in the great books of nature and revelation, for the guidance of the workmen engaged in the erection of that temple, not made with hands, all of which is typified by the trestle board, on which the operative mason lays down the designs for the erection of the material building. Bearing in mind that the lodge typifies human society, organized into government, it follows that the jewels of any state or nation are 1. A sturdy, honest, sterling people, which, though uneducated to begin with, is capable by education and training and by a due sense of and attention to the great truths to be learned from. 2. Nature and revelation, of being developed into 3. A cultivated and refined citizenship characterized by 4. Morality of conduct. 5. Equally before the law. And 6. Uprightness of character. Perfect youth. In our symbolism, the human body is a prototype of the temple of the deity. This speaking of the body as an abiding place of deity is a very ancient metaphor. Therefore, we require as fitting that the body of a man about to be admitted to the craft shall be whole and without deformity. Undoubtedly, this requirement began as a very practical and serviceable role when our craft was operative, and the apprentice was at once put to heavy physical labor. A man of maimed or defective body could not endure the arduous labors involved in building with stone. The antiquity of this requirement is undenied and undeniable. Our oldest code of Masonic law, the Regius manuscript circa AD 1390, in its quaint language declares, "The master shall not, for any advantage, apprentice someone who is outrageous. To put it simply, as you may hear, he should have all his limbs intact and clear, for it would be a great shame to the craft to teach a crippled or lame man who's not apt, as an imperfect person of such blood would not do the craft any great good. So you may understand quite well, the craft requires a strong and able male. A disabled man has no power. You may know it for years upon hours." Anderson's Book of Constitution 1723, the first book of its kind ever published, and still regarded the world over as a stationary authority, thus states the law: "No master should take an apprentice unless he has sufficient employment for him, and unless he be a perfect youth, having no maim or defect in his body, that may render him incapable of learning the art of serving his master's lord, and of being made a brother, and then a fellow craft in due time." But as the society became gradually speculative, this very practical requirement was brought over along with much other similar impedimenta, and as the perfect youth rule gradually lost its practical value, it took on a symbolical meaning. The task of the fraternity was no longer that of erecting temples of stone, but that of erecting temples to deity by developing the individual man into a more or less perfect character. By an easy step, the human body thus becomes the symbol of a temple of deity. Indeed, we know that even in the days of Jesus of Nazareth, the human body was symbolically spoken of as such. Speaking of his own body, he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." When the human body became symbolical of the temple, it was felt that only a body without blemish, a body whole of its limbs as a man ought to be, perfect youth, was a fit symbol of the temple of God, just as a limb with spot or blemish was regarded as an unworthy sacrificial offering. It is argued now in this utilitarian age that this requirement arose out of the necessities of a society of operative workmen and is unsuited to our present speculative masonry. The contention is that the utilitarian purpose of the regulation having ceased, the regulation itself is no longer binding. They forget that many things, once serving purely practical purposes in our fraternity, but now entirely useless from that viewpoint, were for symbolic reasons brought over from operative into speculative masonry. Of what utility in the lodge, we may ask, are now the square, the level, the plumb, the compasses, the 24-inch gauge, the chisel, the trowel, the spade? None whatever. The line of reasoning would therefore dispense with them also. They are retained and cherished solely because they symbolize certain virtues or truths. So it is with man. The most fundamental symbolism in masonry is, as we have just seen, that man is a piece of flawless material, to be chiseled and polished into a perfect stone, to be used in the erection of a moral and spiritual temple. It is an ancient metaphor, older than the Christian era, that man symbolizes the temple, or abiding place of deity himself. A perfect specimen of physical manhood is an admirable and a marvelous piece of work, regardless of the mind or character housed in it. According to our conceit, it is made in the very image of God, Genesis 1:26. In other words, the human body typifies deity. Carlyle in his Sartor Resartus exclaims, "What is man himself but a symbol of God? An imperfect, a crippled, a maimed body is an unworthy type in such a sublime symbolism. Surely nothing less than a perfect youth having no maim or defect in his body, that may render him incapable of learning the art of receiving his master's lore, and of being made a brother and then a fellow craft in due time, is a fit symbol of deity, or of his perfect abiding place, or of a perfect stone in a perfect temple. However pure the material, who would think of putting a broken stone in a fine edifice? And what would one think of a temple splendidly furnished inside, built of the finest marble, but with a broken column, a cracked frieze, or a shattered dome? The argument sometimes made that Freemasonry should not be so exacting as to physical perfection, while we admit those possessed of less than moral perfection, proceeds on a false assumption. Freemasonry has never declared any lower standard of moral qualification for its initiates than that they shall be good men and true, or men of honor and honesty. If less than these find their way into our lodges, the fault is not with Freemasonry or its laws, but with us whose duty it is to guard our portals against the unworthy. Because we are careless or sometimes deceived at one point is no reason why we should obliterate a landmark elsewhere. This utilitarian spirit which would knock off a mark of antiquity here and another yonder, because they are no longer serviceable, would soon strip our fraternity completely of that delightful flavor of age, which is one of its chief charms. Our operative brethren required of their initiates just such degree of physical perfection as enabled them to perform the work of the operative lodge. We should likewise require just such degree of physical perfection as would enable our initiates to perform the work of the speculative lodge. At the same time, we do not think it is necessary to the preservation of this symbolism that an entered apprentice should be denied advancement because of a maim suffered after initiation. The idea of man as a symbol of a perfect stone in a temple is taught chiefly in the first degree. Living stones for that spiritual building, that house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So it is of the symbolism of the rough ashlar and the perfect ashlar. Many considerations operate in favor of the advancement of the entered apprentice or fellow craft, notwithstanding a maim after initiation, which do not apply to the profane. We have gone along very well with this restriction of physical perfection. Many think the increase in membership has been too rapid. There is at least no necessity to open the door any wider to the profane. When we open it to the worthy maimed, we also open it to the unworthy maimed. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.